which we came as a solution, it was about the waste, because our consumption is producing a lot of waste. So waste should be separated, it should be recycled, but also it should be helping contamination of the land and depletion of the mineral resources. And we also suggest that organic manure should be introduced, and it can be done through the cities, and it should be put back to the farmers. Thank you.
Okay, one is working. Thank you, everyone. That was, I think, an amazingly powerful example, and I want to apologize to every group that wasn't able to speak. We took an additional 15 minutes from our next session, but your voices will still be heard. Please report back on those white boards, your sticky notes, and those of us on the SPI will be really looking at this and harvesting this rich information. But again, this is just an incredible example of what we can do together. That was 45 minutes of working together and being able to report back solutions. So I want to thank everyone, and we are going to be moving on to our next session.
Okay, could we have all the panelists for the final session of this morning up on the stage? I can see everybody is in the room for it, so if we can come up and sit on the panel.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask whether everybody has signed the participants list. We need it just for our statistics later on. So please be aware that this is going round.
We are going to start this final session of the morning. For those of you who weren't there first thing, I'm Jim Ski, and I'm co-chair of IPCC Working Group 3. And I think this is a historic moment, because not only were we asked to give a presentation, but an IPCC co-chair has been entrusted with facilitating a session at SPI on land degradation neutrality. This is truly a historical moment. Now, I wanted to flag up, if I could, just the title of this session. It's Tools and Practices to Achieve Multiple Benefits Through Land Degradation Neutrality. And I think we should emphasize the tools and practices part of that, because I think we got a very clear message from plenary earlier in the week that policymakers are very much interested in the implementation agenda and are looking for action-oriented recommendations from the scientific community. So the tools and practices part of it is really critical. Now, as every panel session is operated in a slightly different way, this is the third way of running the session. We have 6 speakers all together, 5 of whom are in the room, and 1 who's submitted a video that we will look at. Some of them have PowerPoints, some do not have PowerPoints, so it's going to be a mixed format. And without any further ado, I'm actually going to pass it over to Ermias Betamariam, who's going to talk to us with PowerPoints about soil carbon as a key indicator. So Ermias, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. And then today, what I'm going to present is mainly about introducing what we really develop as science policy interface report here. And I'm Ermias Betamariam from the World Agroforestry researcher based in Kenya, Nairobi. And I'm also a member of science policy interface of the UNCCD. So I think mainly I'm going to present what is really recommended as a policy recommendation here. Yes, I think being in the Rio Pavilion, it's about climate, biodiversity, and land degradation. It is really interesting that, particularly sustainable land management, soil organic carbon really plays a very key role in terms of, all the 3 Rio conventions. Not only that one, but also it's interestingly, it also linked up with a number of sustainable development goals, starting from food security, climate change, and then all the others. I think it is really very, soils play a very, very pivotal role. And then, in fact, I wouldn't really preach for the already preached ones. I think all our well-being really begins in the soil. What we eat, the food, the fiber, you name it, is really all coming from that. And then oftentimes it is undervalued. And then I think that is really, very interesting to see that there is a lot of interest in terms of policy and development for soils in the last decade than ever before, and I hope it will continue to be like that. So I think soil organic carbon in particular really gives life to soil. I think that is really the heart of the whole system, and then it is a very key, strong indicator of a soil health in general. And then I think the other very interesting thing why it is really selected as part of LDN is that I think there is also a well-developed method of measuring and monitoring soil organic carbon. And then I think when we measure soil organic carbon, indirectly we are also talking about a number of other soil properties and soil health parameters. And then the typical thing, there are also several initiatives besides the Rio Conventions. I think there is, 4 per meal. It's about talking about soil organic carbon in agricultural landscapes. I think the Bond Challenge is talking about restoration. Again, soil organic carbon is important. So I think taking this kind of very interesting indicator, which could have a lot of interesting reporting and then also understanding, is really, really very key in that case. Yes, I think, as you might know, I think we know what so much times, but what we don't know or what is very difficult is how to do it. I think everybody agrees that sustainable land management is really key. Restoration is extremely important, but how to do it is really the part that's really challenging us a little bit. So I think in terms of a theory of change, particularly from research perspective and development, I think we need to have evidence. That's why we need science. And then I'm very happy that the UNCCD consider science is really a vehicle to give evidence so that parties and countries and land managers could make a well-informed decision. So I think if you don't have science behind it, and then oftentimes if you build all your investment on assumptions, I think that would be very difficult. So that's why there should be enough funding, in fact, for this very vehicle of the whole process. So for the whole development agenda, I think it is very interesting. This can be done through the monitoring of effects of sustainable land management, soil organic carbon, because this is the theme. But oftentimes parties ask that, what is the role of this kind of sustainable land management on soil organic carbon? So do we have evidence? Do we don't have evidence? So I think there are really a lot of information required for this kind of discussions. So the other thing is also, I think I was in one of the side events on the second day, and then there was a side event on research in development as a means to scale up all this kind of sustainable land management project and the practices. I think that is also very interesting venue for researchers to change a kind of the way we do things. Before is about you do research for development. When you finish, you put it in. But nowadays, what we are trying to do is that we need to really embed research as we go along with our development, because development will never wait for the research output to come. So I think bringing them together, and then that's a very interesting learning process. We learn from development, and the development people could also get evidence from what we are doing. So I think that is really the way forward, I would say. And then the other thing is really engagement. I think having biophysical only doesn't make sense. So we are talking about socio-ecological thinking. So in that case, I think it's really important to get engaged with the development, the finance, developers, decision makers. When I say decision makers, it started from a single farmer because he's a decision maker of his own farm as a private sector in farm. So the outreach, also the previous group mentioned, I think outreach is very important. I think science and communication is now becoming a little bit better, but oftentimes people say that, this is really jargon. We don't know what it means. How do we translate it? I think real engagement with media, real engagement with different stakeholders is also extremely important. So for the how part, I would say, I think these 3 points are very important: evidence, engagement, and then I think in terms of better outreach communication for the different stakeholders are really, really key. So the next slide is my last slide. So these are the 4 major proposals, policy proposals we gave to the science policy parties yesterday. And in the first proposal, we cannot say recommendation, that is the COP language somehow, because recommendation is a bit stronger. So I think the first thing is, I think we need to do sustainable land management really to scale. I think that is no doubt about it, and then to achieve multiple benefits. Particularly, land gradation neutrality is not about land per se, because we need to think of multiple benefits. Societal benefits, environmental benefits, and then also economic benefits, and then also cultural benefits are really important. Then strengthen the national level coordination and capacity, because most of the parties, day before yesterday, they were telling us that we don't have the capacity. But when you go to the country, there is a research institute, there is a university which really knows where the data, where the information is. I think we need to critically increase the capacity of countries to use their own scientists, so to say, because they are somehow engaged. But I think that is really something missing, and then that is the key thing in that case. So also we encourage parties yesterday to really invite technical organizations like research institutes, because there are a lot, like in India, for instance, we have ICRISAT. What are you really getting from ICRISAT? If you go to Kenya, it is the headquarters of ILRI. So what are really they are getting from all this expertise, what's happening in their ground, so that I think they could get a quick answer or evidence on what they are really thinking to do. So I think that is also an opportunity where research and evidence is really good thing. And then also the last point is also, we need to be also equally important. Bringing gender is not just for the sake of, at the end of the project, but we need to really make sure that women and then men are really engaged equally, starting from the planning throughout the whole process. I think that is also the key fourth message that we pass for the parties. And then I think most of them, they are really happy with the general idea. And then, as you know, the theme of this session is not to give very details, but to give a kind of a very practical kind of ideas for discussion. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ermias. Thank you for the substance, and thank you for your splendid example you've set in terms of timekeeping and keeping under 5 minutes. So thank you. We're now going to turn to Eleanor Campbell, who's a consultant to SPI, and Eleanor has promised me she can deliver her slides in 4 minutes and 24 seconds. So Eleanor, you are on.
Very exact. Managing land to sustain or increase soil carbon levels is optimized by good information about what management practices are most suitable to a specific area. Soil carbon is affected by many interacting processes related to its ecoregion and use. Therefore, an optimal land management option in one place may not be assumed to be optimal in another. Tools for soil carbon estimation are designed to help assess soil carbon levels, including across land areas and as they might change with sustainable land management. These tools can be used to help identify optimal SLM options and help monitor the effects of SLM changes on carbon levels through time. However, tools for soil carbon estimation only work as well as the data used to develop them, test their accuracy, and generate estimation results. In many situations, soil carbon estimation is limited in its accuracy. For example, if an assessment tool has never been used in a region or for a specific practice that is of interest, or if information to do these assessments is not available, poor, or too coarse to be useful. Therefore, a key idea proposed in our report, which Ermias mentioned earlier, is strategic investment in soil carbon monitoring and improvements in soil carbon estimation resources to elevate national capacity for soil carbon management in order to achieve LDN. What I wanted to do in my remaining time is to touch upon sort of one of the key tools that is exemplified in this report, which is the development of decision trees to help policymakers step their way through the process of making the best use of existing information in order to select SLM practices, to, identify gaps in information that are most valuable to fill, and then filling these gaps through targeted soil organic matter measurement and monitoring. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, there we go. In particular, I want to draw attention to Decision Tree 3 for the purposes of this little talk, which specifically looks at the use of soil carbon assessment tools. The entry point into this decision tree is deciding what level of certainty is required to make a decision about deploying a sustainable land management practice to manage soil carbon. So for example, if you're only doing an estimation to guide discussion, perhaps a low level of certainty is acceptable. However, for the development of emissions trading or other economic incentives, a high level of certainty might be required. The decision tree then assists in the process of identifying where there are key data gaps, as well as key needs in developing assessment tools, or whether using available tools that currently exist are enough to make good decisions in soil carbon management. I want to conclude by drawing attention to Table 8. All of these can be found in this report, which I believe is available in the back. Table 8 is presenting results from a review of 7 existing soil organic matter assessment tools. They are currently available. They can be used globally. And most of them received a certain level of prior assessment in a recent World Bank Group report. These tools were assessed in terms of their current applicability to land degradation neutrality planning, with recommendations for what scales and what types of processes they might be most appropriate. I draw your attention to this as a starting point. The main point is that there is an overall need to increase national capacity for soil organic matter, soil organic carbon assessments to support land degradation neutrality. And the purpose of the decision trees is to provide overall guidance to use these tools and develop new resources to achieve that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleanor, again for being very, very brief and sticking to time. Now, one of our panelists is unfortunately unable to be physically with us, but he has sent in a video. Peter Verberg, who's a member of SPI, has recorded some remarks, and if we can get these up on the screen, please, that will move the panel onwards.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to give you a short presentation, although it's a pity that I cannot be physically present at this important meeting. I'll talk about integrative land use planning as a tool to reconcile sustainable use and conservation of land. I was one of the lead authors of the deliverable Science Policy Interface on creating an enabling environment for land degradation neutrality. We conclude that achieving land degradation neutrality and implementing sustainable land use are largely land governance challenges. And often land governance is seen too narrowly. Land governance is much more than land tenure security. While land tenure security is more than alone land titling, land degradation neutrality requires land governance that goes beyond individual landowners and individual farmers, but considers the full value chain and all actors involved in deciding on how to use and manage the land. Land governance thus consists both of the land-based interventions that are enabled, incentivized and constrained, the land tenure situation of a plot. It also includes land use planning. And this land use planning has the important task of reconciling environmental, economic and social priorities. For the future, because all projections indicate in the future there will be more competing claims for the limited resources of land. We need more land for food production, more land for the production, cultivation of renewable energies, more land to mitigate climate change, more land for an increase in population and increasing economic activities, more land for water management in light of climate change, more land to conserve biodiversity and provide ecosystem services. Well, some of these claims on land can be synergistic. Most of them are competing for the same limited resource of land. How can we navigate these competing claims? First of all, we need to reduce the pressure of land. As the IPCC land report indicates, we need to balance our diets, use less animal protein to free up land for other uses. We should be careful with promoting biofuel cultivation, as the amounts of land needed for this type of energy are very high. We need to improve our land use efficiency. Concepts such as sustainable intensification are very useful, but not always operationalized properly. And we need to make choices. We need careful planning, and we need to optimize the multiple objectives of the land. And it's here where integrated land use planning plays an important role in navigating the competing claims. Integrative land use planning is therefore more than just mapping the use of the land. It's about balancing multiple targets, designing multiple and reinforcing complementary interventions. And it's about engaging different stakeholders, not only to compromise between them, also to build an understanding of choices that are made for the future of land. How can science contribute to this integrative land use planning process? We concluded that in the land degradation neutrality, not sufficient use is made of land use planning processes. How can the science help? First of all, by identifying, quantifying the trade-offs and synergies between the goals to help spatial targeting of interventions. Show a small example. Here we show an analysis of areas where we expect synergies in green, or conflict, limited potential of the implementation of no-till, also called conservation agriculture, in Africa. And we see that in different areas, the trade-off between the impacts of implementing this measure are very different. The spatial targeting can help to avoid the trade-off and optimize the synergy. We can also use land use models, because land use planning is often trying to solve today's problems. In fact, we need to plan for the future. Land use models can extrapolate current land use to future land use under certain conditions, partly to account for changing context, also to envision how the world would look under different objectives. And if I change the slide, you'll see a change in land use which may happen if we achieve all our global agreed targets. You see a greening, but you also see more red and orange colors, indicating an intensification of agriculture. So here, the impacts of implementing our targets are very different in different locations. Models may inform further discussion on our targets. Finally, science can help to co-design more optimal solutions. Co-design is not only compromise between stakeholders, it's also to further optimize, limit trade-offs. In this graph, you see possible combinations of interventions and their impacts on biodiversity, landscape aesthetics, and different types of agricultural production. And this type of scientific insights can help to better discuss how to navigate those trade-offs with stakeholders. To conclude, science can inform integrative land use planning. Science has tools available, but it's not sufficiently used. We need to better tailor scientific knowledge, models and tools to really support the use of integrative land use planning for LDN. And here's a scientific challenge to really better support this important process in managing our lands of the future. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and wish you a very important and useful conference and meeting. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Peter, even though he's not here to actually hear the thanks, but it was a valuable contribution. I'd now like to turn to Mariana Krapovic-Solomon, who's also a member of SPI, and you're going to be talking about avoiding, reducing, and reversing land degradation without PowerPoint.
That's right. Yes, I don't have PowerPoint, but I have a piece of paper. I won't be too long. I want to give more space and time for discussion later on. So today I will shortly speak about measures to avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. So sustainable land management, which we already heard a lot about, and avoid, reduce, reverse approach is of essential importance to combat land degradation on the country level, but also on the regional and even global level. What